Thank you, Gail. J Bob, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Late Night Chats. Or if you're in another country, good morning as well, and happy Friday. Um, my co host, Margi Connor, is in India right now, and she's having connection problems. So she's hoping to make it on, but if she can't, that's why. We have a special guest who I'd like to interview. Jasmine Patel is our special guest tonight. I've known Jasmine since I was around like 15, 16, from my first year at Youth Savas as a camper. And she was such a great counselor over the years that I've known her when I went to Savas and made everybody feel welcome and so awesome. She also has a long history with her family with Baba. Her mother, grandfather, and great grandmother, Meher Baba. And Jasmine has so many stories that she would love to share with us. Jasmine, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for the lovely introduction, Peter. I've unmuted myself, so hopefully you all can hear me. It's so nice to see you all here. And yeah, my family goes way, way back with Baba, like Peter mentioned, my mother and my grandfather and my great grandmother. And my mom's side of the family is actually related to Baba. So Baba's mother, Shireen, and my great, great, great grandmother, Shireen, were first cousins. So we have some fun family stories about Baba I would love to share with you because not everyone in the family believed in Baba. So there's some fun and humorous stories around that. So I would love to tell you all these stories and then tell you about my dad and how he came to Baba. And yeah, so I think I'll just start. And then if you guys have questions or you're confused, stop me, raise your hand. So my mom and grandfather met Baba in Bombay when he would come to the Dada Chanji's house, Ashiana. So that's where they would usually go and meet up with Baba. And um, my mom loved Baba and my grandfather loved Baba. And, you know, it's so interesting. I've heard other people tell stories when they've met Baba too. And everybody just always talks about how beautiful he was, you know, and we see pictures of Baba and it's like, yes, he's beautiful. But the fact that everyone is so struck with how beautiful he was, I sometimes sit there and I try to like imagine, like, my gosh, how lustrous he must be, because they literally, like everyone, like my mom and my grandfather, they're like, you could literally see light emitting from him, you know, and everyone was always awestruck. My mom has so many stories. She's like, every time I was going to meet him, I would make a list. This time I'm going to tell him this, and I need to ask him this, and I need to say this. And then she'd get in front of him and she wouldn't say anything. Like her mind would just completely go blank. And she was just in that moment with him, you know, seeing him and, you know, him embracing her, or she's bowing down to him, whatever it is. And then the time goes boom and it's done. And then it's not even until she gets home that she realizes she's forgotten to tell him all these things that like she wanted to tell him. And you know, my grandfather has these stories of, you know, one time he had gone to see Baba and Baba had all these garlands because people had garlanded him with so many garlands. So the garlands were like literally full and beautiful, like garlands with roses and things. And my grandfather spoke Farsi or Persian really well, and Baba, you know, did too. And so my grandfather told him in Persian, and I don't know the Persian, but I know, like, because he told us in English, that what are all these roses to you when you yourself are the rose? And Baba got really happy and beamed and, you know, told him that was really good. And it was a wonderful couplet and he should write a poem about this. But so now coming to the fun story, my great grandmother Gulcher, so my mom's, this is my mother's mom, right? So my grandfather, who I'm talking about, is married to Roshan, and this is Roshan's mother, was a very, very devout, like Zoroastrian, right? Like every day she'd go to the fire temple and everything. And you know, she kind of had a problem with Baba. And she would like say, like, who does he think he is running around here, like saying he's the avatar and having these followers and people are bowing down to him? He should be ashamed of himself, because like Zoroastrians, we never like people bowing down to us, like, oh, please don't bow down to us. And, like it's like this thing. And so she like, always like, anytime the Baba topic came up, she's like, don't talk to me about him. But her husband was sick, and they weren't rich. So whatever little money they had, they kept spending for different doctors and different specialists, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with my great grandfather. So finally somebody said to her, like, Gulcher, why don't you just go to Baba and like tell him what's going on? She's like, I'm not going to him. Again, who does he think he is? And like, why would I go to him? And I go to the fire temple every day and say my prayers. I'm not going to him. So someone's like, but listen, just, he's like family, right? So just like you're telling other people in the family, just go tell him too. So she's like, okay, fine, I'll go tell him. I don't know what good this is going to do, but I'll go tell him. So she goes and, she, meets Baba, and, she doesn't like bow. There's no respect at all. She just walks up to him and like she says, so they told me I should come tell you, like my husband's been really sick, and, we're going to all the doctors. Nobody knows what's wrong with him. We don't have much money, but whatever little money we have, we're like spending on doctors who don't even know what's wrong. And, Baba listened and nodded his head and smiled, and he gave her a rose. And he said, take this rose, and, Erich translated, like, take this rose and put it where your most valuable things are. So she's like, okay. And that's all he said. And that's all he did. He gave that to her, and then, bid her farewell. And she brings this rose home, and she's thinking, okay, where my most valuable things are. So where am I going to put it? So she had a drawer in one of those, big old cupboards that you could, like, a cupboard is locked. Then you have a special drawer in there that also locks. And in there, she had her little bit of jewelry that she had. And to her, those were her most valuable things. So she puts this rose in this drawer where her jewelry is and locks it up. And, she starts noticing, after about a week or so, her husband's just getting better. They haven't been to any other doctors or anything. He just gets better and better. Every day he's getting better. And then he's suddenly fine. A month goes by and he's like completely fine. You'd never know he had been sick. And then, they were invited to somebody's wedding. So that evening, she opens up the drawer because she's getting dressed for the wedding. So she picks out a pair of earrings and a necklace and a bracelet, looks at the rose, and, thinks of Baba and says, he did give this to me and say, put it where your valuable things are. And it seems to have worked, he's better. So she kind of acknowledges that in her head. And the rose is still there, and the other jewelry is still there. She locks it up, and she locks up the cupboard, and they go off to this wedding. And they come back late at night. It's like close to midnight by the time they come home. And she's taking off her jewelry that she's going to put back in this drawer, unlocks the cupboard, then unlocks the drawer to put her jewelry away. And she starts screaming, like, we've been robbed, like, and her husband's like, in the bathroom or whatever, comes out like, what? Who's been robbed? What's missing? Like, he's looking around like everything's still here, what they have. She's like, my jewelry's gone. And he's like, your jewelry's gone. And he's like, well, did you lock the drawer? She's like, I just unlocked the cupboard, and I just unlocked the drawer to put away this jewelry that I have. But my other jewelry is gone. And the only thing she sees in there is that rose, right? This rose that Baba had given her. And that rose is still sitting there staring back at her. And, they determined nobody broke in, nothing else is missing. This drawer was locked, the cupboard was locked, but the jewelry is now gone, right? So she's like, I know this is that Meher Baba's fault. I know he's done this. Just wait till tomorrow comes. I'm writing him a letter. She didn't just write him a letter, because back then you could buy these huge like scrolls. You'd go to the store and you'd get a scroll that you could unroll. So the next day she got a scroll and she wrote him a letter like no letter he has probably ever received, because this woman just cursed through this entire letter, cursed worse than a sailor, like stuff I don't even know what it means, right? Like, I'm just like, she said, what? And what does that mean? Like nobody still told me what it means. I think on my next trip to India, I have to find like other people to like ask what some of the stuff means. But anyway, this woman cursed worse than a sailor. She sends this huge letter off to Baba, calling him every name in the book. Now, Erich read all the mail to Baba, And Baba would sit there sometimes publicly and have Erich read out the letters, and then he would dictate replies. And Erich is going through the letters and he gets this scroll, right? So Erich gets the scroll and he unfurls the scroll and he looks at it and he just kind of scrolls it back up and puts it to the side and picks up another letter and reads it to Baba. And he's just avoiding this scroll. And Baba keeps going, pointing to the scroll, like that one, Erich, that one. And Erich keeps saying, let's wait on that one. We'll wait on that one. Baba, I'll read that after this one, or I'll read that one later. Erich keeps making up an excuse. Baba, I'll tell you that one in private. And Erich is kind of like making his eyes big. Like when he told us, like when he relayed this back in Mandalay Hall, he's trying to mimic his eye expressions. He's like, I kept trying to make my eyes big to tell Baba, like, no, 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 you don't want me reading this in public. I'll tell you later, Baba. And so Erich kept getting other letters. Finally, Baba's like, no, like, Erich, read that letter, you know, like he's like, he almost stood up from his chair and said, read that letter. And Erich is like, oh, Baba. So Erich starts reading it very like quietly, and Baba's like louder. And Erich is still kind of mumbling it because it's awful, right? And Erich is like, I cannot believe I'm having to read this like in front of Baba. And Baba's like, louder, 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 like louder. So Erich is now loudly reading this letter. The rest of the Mandalay is there. There are other people there. And like this letter is awful. And Erich is so embarrassed because it's just cursing and cursing and cursing Baba and telling him how awful he is. And finally, Erich finishes the letter and he like looks over at Baba. And Erich says, to my surprise, Baba is laughing so much. He's completely like beet red. There's tears coming from his eyes. He's trying to catch his breath because he's laughing so much. And he finally catches his breath and he dictates to Erich that I love Gulcher so much because her heart is so pure. Do you see how pure her heart is? That she didn't even like let me go. She basically said what was on her mind, you know, just let me have it. And I just love that, you know, she just didn't care who I was and just let me have it. Like she just, that's how good she is. Her heart is that pure. So he makes Erich write her back a letter that day. And it basically says like, you know, thank you, like I got your letter. I understand you're upset, but I want to remind you that your most precious jewel has been saved. And that's it. And then, you know, signed it with Baba's signature. Well, she gets this letter then the next day and she's still fuming because her jewelry's been lost, right? But this letter comes and she's like, oh my God, like what's he saying now? So she opens up the little letter and she reads it. And, you know, her husband is there, my great grandfather, and she reads it to him. And, you know, he just kind of nods his head and then she like kind of reads it again, you know, that I understand you're upset, but your most precious jewel is saved, kind of a thing. And she's like, he is right about that. He's right about that. So she folds the letter back up and puts it in that drawer with the rose and the missing jewelry and, you know, kind of left it at that. And, you know, like I can't say that she then became like, you know, that fond of Baba or that she became a Baba lover, but she understood that something happened. Yes, her jewelry went missing, but her husband, her most precious jewel, as he called him, was saved. So she kind of came to terms with Baba. You know, she didn't just at every opportunity like badmouth him. Like she kind of came to an understanding. So that's like her story. So then let's fast forward a few years and we're in India and my dad and I are with Erich and my mom and my brother Neville are heading towards the porch and Mara is standing on the porch and Mara sees my mom. And Mara knew my mom because my mom had met Mara even as a little girl. And so Mara is standing at the porch, like waving both of her hands and so happy and, you know, telling my mom to come over. And my brother was, I don't know, maybe 7 at the time. And she's, you know, taking him over. And Mara, you know, like sits them down and talks and, you know, they share stories. And my mom is, you know, telling Mara about, you know, her times meeting Baba and her, you know, when she had met her and how she remembers those times and how those times are just so dear to her and still so real. And, you know, that it doesn't seem like it was that long ago and, you know, how time just stops when it's with Baba. And so they have this nice conversation. And then as they're leaving, Mara pulls out two roses and she gives one to my mom and she gives one to my brother. Now, in our family, we know this story about what happened with the rose. So my mom, who tends to be kind of materialistic, she's got this rose and my brother's got this rose. And my mom, as she's coming down the porch from seeing Mara, is in her head thinking, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this rose? What if I take it home and then things go missing? Like what if my jewelry goes missing or we get robbed or like my material things are gone? And in her head, she's having this conversation with Baba, like, look, Baba, you've put me in this world. This world is a material world. I like my material things, Baba. Why has this rose come back into the family through Mara now? What am I supposed to do? So they aren't even fully down off of like out of the garden yet. And she tells my brother, eat the rose like it's prasad. And my brother is like 7 years old. And I don't know if you all have ever tasted like rose petals, or they're bitter. Okay. And this is like a good size rose. Roses are pretty big in India, right? They're not like teeny tiny roses. So my mom like breaks off all the rose petals, shoves them in her mouth, starts chewing, and does the same to my brother. His whole little mouth is like just full of rose petals. And he's trying to spit him out. And she's like, you can't spit it out. Mara gave it. You have to eat it. It's basically prasad. And this poor kid's got like tears rolling down his eyes and he doesn't want to eat it. But she manages to make him eat it. And then, they join my dad and I, and we're with Erich, and we're like, what's wrong with Neville? Like, he looks like he was crying, and Neville's like 7 at the time. And he's like, she made me eat a rose. And we're like, what? So anyway, she tells us the story, and Erich is there. And Erich is like, I remember that letter, Gulnar. I remember that letter. I'll never forget the letter. And so then he like reiterated the story of the letter and how embarrassed he was reading it and how Baba wanted it louder and louder. And he was just so embarrassed, like reading this letter. And there, of course, there are other pilgrims there, right? So they're like, Mara gave you a rose and you ate it. So Erich made my mom in Mandali Hall tell this story of like what had happened in the family and how her grandma, so my great grandma's like jewelry had gone missing, but her husband was okay. And it was a riot in Mandali Hall that day because like, yeah, people were like, okay, fine. So you ate the rose because you were afraid. And my mom's like, she's very like frank and like straightforward. And, she tells everybody, she's like, I like my material things. I know like I'm in Baba's family, but I like the good things in life and I don't want my stuff to go missing, and people are laughing and it was pretty funny. And I think like the entire 2 weeks we were there, that was the talk, like, Gulnar ate this rose and fed the other one to Neville. And it was pretty funny. So that's that story. Now I'm going to tell you the story of how my dad came to Baba. So my dad's family knew about Upasni, and they'd been to Sakori, and they knew about Sai Baba, and they had been to Shirdi. And when my mom and dad started dating, my mom, anytime they were going to go see Baba, she would say to him, do you want to come meet Meher Baba? And he would always say no, 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 you guys go. But he never told her like why he would say no. And my dad never made it seem like, oh, Meher Baba, like, why are you guys into him? Because he knew that like, it was family. So he never said anything. Well, so here we are now, like, I don't know, I think I must have been 10 or 11 years old, and my brother must have been like 5 or 6. My mom had kept a picture of Baba like on our little prayer wall that she had, where she had all, different Jesus and Zoroaster and, the fire and Baba and Sai Baba and, Upasni and Godavari Mataji from like Upasni's place. She had all these pictures. And so Baba's picture was up there too. And my dad never minded that. But so my dad has a dream. And in the dream, he is actually on Seclusion Hill, which later when we went there and he saw Seclusion Hill, he recognized that from his dream. But in the dream, he's like on this hill or mountain, and Baba is there. And Baba calls my dad close, like tells him to like come close. So my dad comes close, but then they hear like this noise around them. So he looks, and like this big group of Westerners are coming. So Baba motions to my dad, like, shh, like the sign to be quiet. And Baba ducks into a cave. And my dad sort of looks over there from the side of his eye. And Baba again is signaling like, shh, like, don't tell like them where I am. So the people come up to my dad and go, have you seen Baba? Have you seen our Baba? Where is our Baba? So my dad like points them in the other direction because Baba had said, like, be quiet, don't tell them. So he's like, oh, I think he went that way. So they all go running off that way. And once they're kind of off in the distance, my dad looks over to Baba again, and Baba's doing this very good. And then his arm just comes out of the cave. And my dad's like, it got longer and longer and longer and longer till it reached my dad's shoulder. And then it pulled him in there with him and just gave him this hug. So when he gave him this hug, my dad woke up from this dream and he said, like, he felt so much love like he had never felt, like flooded through his body. And he wakes my mom up and he says, Gulnar, get up and go get that picture you have of Meher Baba. I had a dream, but I don't know if it was him. I just go get the picture. So my mom gets the two pictures she had. She had like the 1925 picture of the younger Baba. And then she had like a 1958 picture of like the older Baba. So she took both, right? Because he looks different in each one. And so she gives him the pictures and my dad looks at him and he goes, yes, it was him. It was him. So he narrates this dream to my mom. And my mom says, I know, that's Baba. Like, I'm so glad you had this experience. Like, I'm so glad you got to experience this. Now you know, like, why I kept trying to get you to come meet Baba. So my dad says to my mom, I didn't come meet him. Maybe like, so in Bombay, here's the deal. In Bombay at the Baba Center, there was the guy that ran the Baba Center, and his name was Manik Mehta. And he was kind of not such a good guy. He was a womanizer and just like a cheater, and he cheated people out of their money, and he manipulated people. And so he was not a good person. And he was going around pretending he was Meher Baba, right? So to my dad, in my dad's head, that's who Meher Baba was, which is why he never wanted to go meet him and always wondered, like, oh God, why is Gulnar's family so into him? Don't they see he's such a bad guy? So then that summer, or no, the summer after, when we went to India, we went to like Mehrabad and Meherzad for the first time. We stayed at the Pilgrim Center. And my dad told this story to Erich, about this dream. And Erich told my dad that one other person has had this dream. And this dream signifies that Baba is pulling you very close to him. And my dad told Erich, Erich, my biggest regret is that I had all these chances to see him in person and I didn't. I even went to boarding school in Pune, like literally down the street from Baba's house. And I still didn't, see him. And I dated Gulnar, and he's like, she told me so many times to come see him and I didn't. And my dad said all because of this Manik Mehta and what a bad guy he was. And he was going around Bombay like, he was a womanizer, he was cheating people, and he was claiming he was Meher Baba. And Erich told my dad that, Manik came to Baba and asked for forgiveness eventually, and Baba forgave him, just forgave him. And my dad goes, well, that's great, but I don't forgive him because it's his fault that I didn't meet Baba. And Erich says to my dad, but Baba's had his nazar on you this entire time. Don't you see? Like, you married into his family, and when the time is right, he revealed himself to you, right? And my dad goes, yeah, I suppose that's right. And then my dad became like that. My dad became that Baba lover that wore the Baba button everywhere. No matter where he went, he was wearing his Baba button, and anybody who asked him, he was very happy to tell everybody who Meher Baba was. And like, here we are, like, even my mom, who like, of course, believes in Baba, like we were all kind of embarrassed, like, oh my God, like, what's he doing? Like, why does he have to make it so public? And oh no. And, like Peter talked about the youth sahavas. And one of the things we would always ask kids at the youth sahavas, one of the things I think we still ask the kids is, what do you do when people come to your house and they see all these pictures of Baba and they wonder, like, who is that, right? Like, what do you tell people? What do you come up with? And my brother and I, we were always like, oh, we just say like, oh, that's an old relative, and, like an uncle or whatever, an old relative. And we got to the point where we would tell people, oh, that's Meher Baba, he's in our family, and he's like a saint in India. We kind of got to the saint in India part. But my dad had like no qualms to just be like, well, that's God, that's Meher Baba. He was Jesus, he was Zoroaster, he was the Buddha, that's who that is. Like he would just say it just like that. And we were so embarrassed that he would do that. We were just like, I cannot believe, like, he's doing this. Like, why does he do this? And my mom was so funny. She's like, you see, that's why Baba didn't reveal himself to him until much later, because otherwise we'd be dealing with this much longer. He's so compassionate, he's just having us deal with this now. And my brother and I, of course, were like, yeah, okay. And it was like a joke at our house. Anytime we're going to go somewhere, it's like, oh God, is dad going to put his Baba button on? Is he going to wear his Baba button? Like, what's happening? Is he going to wear the Baba button? And then so Bal would always come to our house whenever he came to Washington, D.C. We were in Baltimore. So Bal would always take one day and come to our house in D.C., in Baltimore. So Bal would always tell stories of like Upasni Maharaj and Baba, and Godavari Mataji, who was, like Upasni's, the nuns that are there. She was like the head nun. And when she came to Baltimore, she actually came to our house. And it was completely unexpected. Like, my mom had been in touch with them for like a very long time. And so when she heard they were coming, she, found out where they were going to come. And the group that had invited them were bringing them to like the Inner Harbor to see the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, because it's very nice, actually. And we live very close to the Inner Harbor, so we could just walk there. So we did. We walked there. And, Godavari Mata says to my dad, oh, I remember you. You remember when you came and you were dancing at the arti? Because they do arti there. And my dad's family would go to Shirdi and go to Sakori. And my dad had been there since he was a kid. And as a sort of a young man in his like late teens or early 20s, he had gone there and they were doing arti and he found it very amusing. So he was like dancing, doing dance moves to the turning and, with the little thing that they, the tray they take and do around, and he was just having fun. And she had seen him and she remembered this and she reminded him. And my dad couldn't believe that she remembered this, because like this was so long ago, right? She's like, yeah, I remember. So then it was summer, so it's kind of hot. So we're like, what can we do where we can take them all inside, because we don't want them to get a heat stroke or overheat. So the IMAX theater is right there. And they were having a show on the Grand Canyon. So, my dad asked Mataji, hey, would you and the other kanyas, the other nuns, like to see this film on the Grand Canyon? And it's on this big screen and you can see the theater from the outside. And my dad's like, you see this whole big thing, that whole thing is the screen. So it's that big and you get to sit and it's like, you're almost like in whatever they're showing you. So she's like, yeah, that'll be great. Let's go see that. So here we are, my mom, my dad, my brother and I, 2 or 3 other Gujarati families that had come, that had, invited her, and all these nuns, right? In their orange saris, they wear like their orange, like saffron colored saris. And we're in this whole section in like the IMAX theater watching this Grand Canyon film. And there's a part in the film where it like suddenly just, the river is like rushing. It shows this rushing river and literally everybody in the theater, including all of us, like jumped because it just comes up so suddenly and it's such a big screen. You almost feel like you're in that river rapid. And everybody jumps and my dad notices, my dad jumped too. Mataji, like Godavari Mataji, she didn't jump. So my dad kind of leans over to her and he goes, didn't that scare you? It scared everybody in here, but everybody jumped, but you didn't jump. And she goes, I'm the great river Godavari. You think this little film is actually going to scare me? And she, puts her little sari over her face and like laughs, and it was so sweet. So this film ends and we come out of the theater and there's a merry-go-round there. And Mataji says to my dad, I want you to take all the kanyas on the merry-go-round. So my dad, and I don't know, like 15 or 20 of these nuns in their bright orange saris, get on this merry-go-round. And my mom has pictures, I kid you not. So my dad's like sitting, I think he picked a horse. So he's on a horse And like all the different kanyas are on different animals in their saris, and they've all like, sat on these like merry-go-round rides. And some of the older ones, like Devi Tai and those like older ones, they're like on the little bench, like the seated benches, because they weren't going to climb up. And they just had the best time. And my mom didn't get on, and Mataji, Godavari Mataji didn't get on. And Godavari Mataji says, and my brother and I, of course, got on because, we were kids. She says to my mom, look at Loveji, like, look at how he is so much like a kid. Like, look at him. His heart is just so pure. He's like a kid. He's having so much fun laughing with these nuns in their saris on a merry-go-round. Like, he just, there's no embarrassment. He's just having fun. Like, look at how happy he is. So the ride is over. Everybody gets down. Everybody's laughing. And Mataji says, like, and there are these other Gujarati families there, I'm going to go to Gulnar's house now. And my mom's like, oh, because she wanted to come over. And what are you going to say? You're not going to say no. So my mom goes, oh, of course, Mataji, you're welcome to come. And she says to my dad, hey, I'm going to go home and I'm going to like prep some like fruit and stuff, like some food that we can offer to everybody. So you then slowly bring them and come. And they all walked to the house, believe it or not. So even they had driven and parked. And my dad's like, why don't you drive? I'll like give you directions, or I can come with you. And we can, drive up to the house. And Mataji's like, no, we're going to walk. You all walked here, right? So we're all going to walk. So it's like 3 or 4 blocks. So it's not that far. My mom had already gone. And cut up some fresh fruit and things, because the Zoroastrians are not vegetarians, right? So the Gujarati families that were there were horrified that Mataji was going to come to our house, because it's kind of like, oh my God, they're not kosher. Don't you know they like eat meat and chicken and fish, and we're going to go to their house? How are we going to go to their house? But like all those things that, like kind of around Baba and the perfect masters, like they break down like those like, barriers that we build, right, within ourselves, and with our religions or whatever, where we don't do this, or, oh my God, how can we do this? So she tells them too, and you all are coming too. And they were going to drive. And she's like, no, we're all going to walk. So these 15 nuns with Mataji, my dad, my brother and I, and these 2 or 3 other Gujarati families, and some of them had kids too, are all now walking 4 blocks. It was quite a sight. I'm sure like people were just like, what is going on? Like, have the Hare Krishnas come to town, or what is this, right? Just walking to our house. So then we get to our house, and my mom had set up this chair and everything for her, this nice like sofa chair. And, she comes, she sits down. My mom took our cockatiel that we had and put her upstairs in the bedroom, because my mom thought like, oh, she might not want to see a bird in a cage, because that might not be good. So she put the cockatiel upstairs. So she comes in, she sits down, and she talks about the times that she had seen Baba, right? Like with Upasni, and there are pictures, right, of her. She's so young, and she's standing there with Upasni Maharaj, and Baba's right there sitting. So she, told us of those times when she had met Meher Baba. And there's a picture in my parents' house that they had at the time, right when you walked in, you saw this, was a picture of Baba like smiling, and he's like doing this, like kind of like, see, like it's this funny expression. And she looked at that picture right when she walked in, before she sat down. She goes, oh my gosh, do you know what he's saying to me here? He's saying to me, see, like we meet here too. Like, how amazing is this? So then she sits down and she tells us the stories of, meeting Baba and her life with Upasni and Meher Baba and like their work. And she eats the fruit and passes it all out as prasad to everybody that had come, including the Gujarati families, who were still kind of like, are we actually going to eat like from here? Like, oh my God, they're still a little like, these people are not vegetarian, right? And like my mom, all she was serving was like fruit, like different fruit. And then Mataji like suddenly goes, I want to go upstairs. And my mom's like, okay. And she walks up the stairs, upstairs, right to where the bird was, and asks my mom, why is this bird up here? Why isn't this bird downstairs with me? And my mom's like, oh, I put the bird up here because we thought like you might not want to see a bird in a cage. She's like, oh no, we have parrots too there, in Sakori, and we keep them in cages, and they come out, sure, but they stay in cages. And my mom's like, yeah, this one actually comes out too, and she flies around and blah, blah, blah. And Mataji goes, well, take her out. And I was the main person handling the bird. So I take the bird out and Mataji holds the bird and gives the bird a kiss. And at this point, I'm just like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one giving the bird kisses. Look, she's giving the bird a kiss. She's petting the bird. And she said, she doesn't have to be up here. She can be downstairs in the cage. It's totally fine. So then we carry the cage down, and put her back in her spot. And Mataji goes, see, look, she's so much happier being down here with all of us. So those are like my main stories that I can like remember off the top of my head, that I wanted to share with you guys. But I would love to hear your stories. So, I always tell people I have like these stories to share, but what I love are all your stories, because they're not like, oh, well, I was just in a Baba family and I knew about Baba. Like your stories are just different because you've come to Baba through like some other experiences, or, I love those stories where people are like, I saw a picture of Baba and just it awakens something in me, or just these stories of how people have come to Baba. That's so different. It's so different than my experience that I just love those stories. So we have time. You're welcome to ask me questions too. But yeah, if we have time and you want to share your stories, I would love to hear them.
I was gonna say thank you so much for this. It's always so interesting to get the perspective of someone who grew up in close proximity to him. Obviously, something that is different from my experience. Seeing him from a completely different light. He wasn't family to me. There was an initial distance, and then that distance is dissolved away because typically all the religions of the world are founded to pedestalize a particular figure, whether it's Zoroaster or Krishna or Baba, without getting at the core of their teaching, which is realize you and I are no different. So it took a
Right.
little while to get past that, but it's so nice to see someone who was actually in that family experience. One thing that I would love to hear, Jasmine, is whether there were people who came next to him and had a glimpse of the self, or as Ramana Maharshi would say, or the seventh plane. Whether, because he would say, I'm not giving you miracles or siddhis, I'm not giving you things in part. When I give it to you, it'll be the full experience, right? He'd
Mhm,
always say that. So I'm
mhm,
curious if anyone had those experiences next to him. And I also do know that there were fifth and sixth plane saints who would come next to him and even ask him, like children, am I, have I seen God? Am I God yet? And
mhm.
he'd, assuage them. And to him, obviously, all is one. Regardless of where you are, he sees the infinite, which is all that is in the here and the now, in the present moment, right? There is no past or future to a realized one. But I'm curious if people had those personal glimpses of the self, the same way, when someone went to Ramana Maharshi or Sai Baba of Shirdi or Mahavatar Babaji, people would say, I was transfixed. And for a moment, eternity reigned, right?
Yes.
Have people said that?
If they did, they didn't tell us. We have an inkling that perhaps my grandfather did have experiences that he didn't share with us, because I think he just knew like we were not ready for something like that. But my brother and I, as we reflect back now on things that like my grandfather had said or predicted or mentioned, we're like, oh my God, like he was really right. Like, how did he know that? I'm like, there was no internet back then. Like now, like it's so easy for us to quickly look up things or look up facts or look up dates or just look up things and find them. But we're talking like, he was telling us these things in like the 80s and 90s. He was just, telling us things and we're like, yeah, whatever. But it has actually like, come true. Like it's come to pass. And we're like, how did he know that? Or something we hear now, like, oh, that, somebody said this or did this or this was true. And it's like, now, how did he know that? Like, and he's in Bombay. It's not like he had the World Wide Web to like look this up. So we think like he knew a lot more than he let on to. We think he knew a lot more than he let on to. And it's like, we feel the same way about my dad. Like we lost my dad in 2000? Yeah, in 2000. And everything like that day was such an interesting day, like the things he did. It's like, I think he almost knew he was going. And so like, I think like my grandfather and my dad for sure have had experiences, but have not like actually shared them. I personally have not. My brother had an experience on the center where he actually saw Baba, and I'll share that story with you all. But like after my brother had that experience, I remember just praying to Baba and be like, oh my God, Baba, please do not appear to me like that because I will have a heart attack and die. I'm like, seriously, Baba, I will die. I love you and I know you're God, but if you just appear to me, I will die. So I don't want to see you like that. So the way I see him in things like I'll see a cloud that looks exactly like him and I'll take a picture of it. Or like on the Samadhi, I was in India in December and I was at morning arti and I was standing outside the Samadhi and I looked up and one of the rocks like literally had Baba's face on it. So I took a picture of it and I posted it on Facebook. Or I'll see like a leaf or a pattern like in the sand or something that looks just like him. And I always take pictures of those and I always thank him. Thank you for appearing to me this way because I can handle this way. But if you just like literally show up, like I will die. I will just have a heart attack and
Well,
die.
it's like a softer version, right? In some
Yes,
sense. Like
yes,
the same I felt the same with the tree outside his house in
yes,
Myrtle Beach. And I think nowadays people dismiss everything as coincidence. To me, coincidence is just God acting anonymously. There's almost
absolutely.
always a hidden pattern in existence. But it was very interesting when I visited the Samadhi, I had come across the Samadhis of other realized souls, and I'd always felt a sense of stillness and bliss and eternity at each of them. But with his samadhi, it was a little extra. It was a little stronger. It was like a pure furnace of love, almost like a furnace that just burned you. If you were, and you have to be careful in some sense, because if you get too close, it will efface you. And the ego knows that deep down. Like the ego
Oh,
might
the
say,
ego
hey, I want to
knows.
be on the spiritual journey. But when it comes to that final brink, it actually doesn't want to die. And he makes it very clear. The other
Yeah.
thing about him is I've noticed he tests you like no one else. You can bullshit about your spiritual progress or even convince yourself. But with him, if you even utter something as small as I've made an iota of progress, I've noticed he tests you almost immediately. Almost immediately. And it's a good lesson because it helps you keep things real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And my mom's the first one who will say like, you don't want to go too deep into this because then it's like the end of you, right? And she knows that, right? And she's met Baba and I think like those experiences of where, you have this strong sense of self of I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this, I have to tell him this and then you get up there and you like lose everything and you lose sense of time and space and you're just like so enraptured by him and then boom it's gone and you're like oh my god I didn't say it and like multiple times she would plan this and not be able to like say it so she knew right like yeah like it's you lose yourself in that and like exactly what you're saying like the ego doesn't truly want to go and so even my grandfather would say like yes this is all good this is all wonderful but like the path to be truly spiritual is not an easy path and like look at the new life like I can tell you right now, like I would die again if I was dragged along on the new life. I don't think I would have survived it. But look at what he did for us. He did that for us. So we don't have to do that. That doesn't have to be what our spirituality is. He literally
No,
said, just whatever work you do it for me, turn it over to me. Like he made it so easy in this advent of his that I'm like, my God, the compassion, right? Knowing like where we were going to be and just how we were going to be, that it's like, I'm making it so much easier for you this time. I'm doing the work for you. So all you have to do is remember me and whatever work you do, do it for me. If you get married, you raise your family like that, you're also doing for me. He's not even saying like become a nun or, like a hermit or whatever. And just try to find him, just do your work and keep repeating my name and you'll get there eventually. And I'm just like, oh, thank God. That it's an easier path because like I'm not cut out for the new life or are any of you cut out for the new life?
well, I feel like that's what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was a perfect master, had with the whole Hare Krishna mantra thing, right? So regardless of how that got used, the idea was mantra chanting was a very, very easy way of drawing you into stillness. And I had this, I'll share this and I want to let other people go. Regarding the new life, I had this intuition one day during a deep period of connection to source, and it just made sense. I can't prove it, but I wanted to share it with you because I want to know if you had felt anything similar. I realized that during the new life, what he was doing, I had this vision in my head several years ago when I was taking the statistics exam in school. The
Exactly.
instructor told us at the end of school of the exam that the exam was about 4 hours long, but he took it and passed it in about 10 minutes to make sure the difficulty level was right for the students. That image popped into my head and I realized, he accomplished during that 4 years. I mean, it was realized obviously, but he went through the process of realization, which would be from a state of an ordinary man to the seventh plane, in order to make sure that the test difficulty was still right for the rest of the people. And I just know that's right, but I have no way of proving it. He was almost taking the test in real time, something that would have taken obviously lifetimes and lifetimes for the average person, but he was charading it. I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. And yeah, like he did the work for us. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm going to go through this for you all and then make it easier for you. You all can do it, but you don't have to like do what I did on the New Life. I mean, it's just so compassionate. I feel like so compassionate. So I'll tell you my brother's story because I mentioned that and y'all might be wondering, so what is Neville's story? So Bao was visiting the center in Myrtle Beach, and we grew up on the East Coast in Maryland. So we visited Myrtle Beach 1 to 2 times a year. So we always had a summer vacation there. We always came in the summer. And if Bao came, we came twice sometimes. And sometimes we would come up even in the winter, like during the Christmas and for the New Year's square dance, not Christmas, but for the New Year's square dance. So Bao was there. So of course we were there. And on the center, my parents had this rule that, okay, while you're on center, we're okay if you're not with us the whole time, but in the evening when it's time for meeting in the meeting place, we expect you to be in the meeting place when the meeting starts. And we were always very good about that. We were. So we're all there, but my brother Neville hasn't arrived yet. And this is unusual because everybody's always there. And all the kids would always sit with Jeff, and Jeff would sit right in the front on the floor with all these kids surrounding Jeff, right? So Neville's missing from all these kids. And my mom, looks to my dad. She's like, should I go look? Should I tell somebody? And he's like, no, just wait, And then Bao, of course, starts to talk. So, you don't want to get up during that time. Well, about half hour into Bao's talk, my brother shows up and he's at like the door. And he's looking to my mom and he's like telling her to come out. And clearly it looks like something's wrong because he looks like pale as a ghost, like something's really wrong. And he's calling her out. And my mom's like, okay, like, give me a minute, because she doesn't want to get up while Bao's talking. But he's really like, no, you need to come like right now. So she kind of like slowly inches her way out, like, making herself small so she's not disturbing anybody. And my brother tells her he was on his way to the barn, just kind of to walk by the barn. And then he was going to walk back after the like bowing down at the barn. And he knew by then it would be time for the program. But as he's walking to the barn, he saw this guy coming from the path as if he was coming back from the beach. And he looked a little odd. And, my brother noticed that his shoes looked like Roman sandals, like those leather strap sandals that you wrap around your feet. And of course, we know on the center, there's a rule like closed-toed shoes, right? Like nobody is on the center with sandals or flip-flops. So my brother's like, oh my God, I wonder if this weirdo has wandered in from the beach. And, in his little brain, like teenage 14-year-old boy brain, he's like, how can I test this? He's like, I know, I'm going to say Jai Baba, see if the guy says Jai Baba back. So my brother, like, reaches, they kind of cross each other, and my brother goes, Jai Baba. And the guy goes, Jai Baba. But, like my brother almost got scared because when he looked at him, my brother's like, he didn't have like eyes. He just had whites of his eyes. Like his eyes were like rolled up in his head. And before like Neville could react, the guy grabbed him by the shoulder and pushed him down on his knees. So my brother is now down on his knees with this weird guy standing above him, holding him down. And when he looked up, he could see the barn. And he's like, this light came out of the barn and like right there, like stopped right where he was. And out of the light stepped Baba, like literally Baba steps out of this light and starts talking to him. But when he said talking to him, he's like, Baba was like telepathically talking to him, right? Like asking him. So Baba goes, hey, how is my Gulnar doing? And my brother's like, oh, she's fine. She's probably wondering where I am. Like I'm supposed to be with her right now. And then my brother goes, oh, how is my family in India? Like, how is my Roshan Mummy? That's what we called, our grandmother. And how is Memun Baba, like our grandfather who had met him, and Anu and Farizad, like, how are they? And Baba's like, oh, they're fine. My nazar is on them always. They're fine in Bombay. They're doing just fine. And so my brother notices behind Baba, like, is this light, like a pink light that's jiggling. And my brother goes, Baba, who's that behind you? Is that somebody behind you? And Baba smiles and like steps aside. And from behind him pops out Bob Brown. And Bob Brown had just died like the year before. And we were all missing him so much. We were so close to Bob and Jane. And my brother's like, oh my gosh, Bob, it's you. Like, we miss you so much. And, and Baba smiles and Bob smiles. And then Baba stands again and Bob is like behind him. So he's not visible anymore. So this conversation just goes on, like my brother said, for, I don't know, like 10 or 15 minutes, because he was like 30 minutes late. And it's just normal banter. Like Baba shows up to him to just do this normal, like friendly banter. There was nothing amazing or anything. And then Baba goes, well, you make sure you tell Gulnar, like, that, you met me and that I send my love. And my brother's just like, yeah, okay. And then just like in a flash, just like that, the light disappeared, Baba disappeared, and the weird guy that was holding him down, that was like a physical person, also disappeared. So then, of course, Neville jets back to the meeting place and calls my mom out and like tells her the story. And my mom is just like, okay. Well, so my mom goes, well, we have to tell Bao this, right? We have to tell Bao. So the break happens and my mom like beelines it, which we never did. We would always wait in the back. Like, we would always let people go first. Like we would be the last ones and we wouldn't take up much time. But this time she's like right up there, like, oh my God, Bao, like I have to tell you this. And so she makes Neville tell him. And so Bao just listens, just listens and goes, yes, so you have to come to the youth Sahavas. And we hadn't heard about the youth Sahavas somehow, and my mom goes, okay, sure, he can go to the youth Sahavas. When is it? And it's like, it's next week. And my mom goes, I can't bring him back next week. And he goes, then Jasmine will bring him. I'm like, I will? And he's like, yes. She might be too old, but she can come as a counselor. So like, this is how like our youth Sahavas journey started, like where, he just said they're coming and we hadn't signed up or anything, but suddenly we came. And then every year we came, right? He was a camper all the years through. And I came as that first year I came, I stayed in the coop because nobody was expecting me. And I wasn't a counselor that year. That year I helped out Roz in the kitchen. And then after that year, I came as a counselor every year. I'd bring my brother. But that was, and so Bao was so matter of fact, like, yes, it happens. And yes, you saw him. And yes, he appeared to you. And my brother's like, but who was that weird guy with the Roman sandals and his eyes rolled back in his head? And Bao goes, Baba has many agents. And that's all we heard. Baba has agents. We still haven't figured out what kind of agents. My brother's like, yeah, it's like a James Bond agent, or like, what is this? What kind of agent? Like, who was this? He's like, this was like a man that pushed me down. Like, I felt his arm on my shoulder. Like, I saw him. And I'm like, I guess a physical agent. I don't know, Nev. Like, but like that, and then we told Jane. Jane was, of course, at the top too. And we told him we saw Bob and how he was in this pink light. And, she said, I've had this feeling that when he comes back, he's going to come back as a girl. So it's interesting that you saw him in a pink light. But after his story of that, like I was a little bit freaked out. And that's like when my prayers started of Baba, please don't appear to me like that, because I will literally have a heart attack and die. And that's not how I want to die. And maybe that's a great way to die, though, if you think about it. Like Baba appears to you and you die right there, like your whole thought is just about him. But that's not how I want to go. So I like seeing him in the clouds and the leaves and the sand and the trees and the stone on the samadhi. Like, those are much nicer ways for me to see him.
Beautiful. Hey, I wanted one question. When Godavari Mai was there with your family, was she speaking in Hindi or English or?
She was speaking in Hindi and Gujarati, actually mainly Gujarati, because the families that had invited her over were these Gujarati families in Baltimore that we weren't even in touch with. We didn't know. I don't even know like how my mom found out that she was coming. She saw a sign in the Indian store. They had like put up signs in the Indian store that Godavari Mataji was coming and to call this phone number if interested. So like, her thing was we were going to go visit her. Like we weren't expecting her to come to our house or any of this. And like, so she came to our house, she visited, we had that visit, and she was still in town for the whole week. And she had told my parents, I want you all to come each day, come. And my dad's like, well, I work. And she's like, it's okay, come after work. And there was one day at work where my dad worked as like a mechanical engineer. And there was a boiler, like they had these big boilers, and it just wouldn't start. It wouldn't start. Nobody could start it. And so my dad, okay, because Mataji's in town, he goes, well, let me give it a try. And he gives it a try by saying Mataji's name as he went to start this boiler, and it started. So that evening we show up to her place, and the first thing she says to my dad is, so how was that boiler? Right? And it's like, oh my gosh, like those types of things really blow my mind, that like they know like what you did, or they know your thoughts. And like Baba talks about those things, right? Like my mom would write a letter saying like I wanted to say these things and I didn't get to, and like Mera or Money would write back to her that Baba knows your thoughts. You don't have to worry that you can't say it, because he already absorbs it all like into him. He already knows it all. But like, my dad was just like, oh my God, like she knew, like, how did she know? Like, how did she know? Like, I didn't tell anybody. He came home and he told us, but we were with him. We didn't tell her. Like, we literally walked in and that's the first thing she said to him. And it's like, wow, that's kind of cool.
I don't know, you didn't mention, but your grandfather, now I knew him as Bowman.
Bowman, yeah. We called him Bemun, but Bowman, yes. That's how his name is
Anyway.
spelled, Bowman. And
Yeah.
the Persian like pronunciation is like Bahman. And then in India they say like Bowman. That's how they
Yeah.
say it. But like, yeah, in like it's Bowman, yes. Like that's what
But-
everybody in America called
But
him.
I understood that he either grew up or with Baba's brother Jal and Padre and all of them.
He grew up with all of them. He
Yeah,
grew up
all
with
of those, all of the ones that were going to be future Mandali, he was just part of that community, right?
Yeah, and Baba called him to be Mandali. This was before he got married, but Baba said, my grandfather said, I don't think that life is for me, Baba. So will you allow me to just, have a family life? And Baba said yes. And then we just, in the last 5 years or so, found out my grandmother, before like she passed, so Roshan, his wife, like 2 years before she passed, had told my mom, Baba asked for you to Gulnar, like Baba had asked for you to be part of the Mandali, to be with like Mera and Money and all of them. But my grandma didn't want to give her up, nor did my grandfather really. So again, they were like, oh, we don't want to do that. But my mom said, I wish they would have, because she's like, the whole time growing up, all I wanted to do was join like Godavari Mataji. I wanted to become one of the nuns. And she's like, I had even asked her, like, hey, can I come here and be one of the nuns? And she's like, you can be, but you have to get permission from your parents. And the nuns that are there in Sakori, like they have a sponsor, either somebody in their family sponsors them, or there's like a sponsor, like somebody sponsors them, so that, like the fact that they're staying there and they're not working, they're still taken care of. Like some sponsoring them means somebody like gives money for them to like be there. And my mom didn't know this. And she was like, so Baba asked for me to be part of the women Mandali and you said no? And my grandma was like, yeah, I said no, because I didn't want that life for you. And I didn't want you to leave us. Like, I didn't want you to leave us. And so then I told my mom, I'm like, but see, if you would have done that, like Neville and I wouldn't be here. So you kind of had a different path. She's like, but I didn't get the choice. She's like, I would have totally chosen that.
Yeah. I remember, going to your mom's place there in Bombay, and it was really quite small, and all the rooms all kind of were open,
Yeah.
and you had a TV in the kind of central thing. And I remember your grandfather saying, we have a TV in every room.
He had such a good sense of humor. And yeah, like their room is like the size of a door. Their house was the size of a dorm room, and they raised 3 girls there, right?
Yeah,
so
it was really beautiful. And yeah, and Parinaz, was it Parinaz or
Parizad.
Parizad? Yeah, that's right, Parizad and Arnavaz or Anu. They used to go for long walks.
Yes.
Bombay, was part of their exercise. But
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I had a very nice time with Arnavaz.
Yeah, I know you got to see her, and I got to see her too. Like when I got to visit her too.
Yeah, that was really wonderful.
Nice.
I saw her on the path and I was coming from the tomb and she was going to the tomb.
Mm,
Saw each other out there and she kind of came weeping in my arms and said, I'm the only one left.
I
You know,
know, because now everybody's gone. Like she's got
yeah,
us here and we're
yeah,
waiting for her green card to come through, but it's not easy because she's
yeah,
like trying for it on a sibling visa, right? Because she doesn't have kids. She never got married and
yeah,
nor does she have a spouse. It's not a spousal visa. It's a sibling visa, which is like bottom
yeah,
of the barrel of all the
yeah, yeah,
visas.
it was
So.
just, yeah, that whole way of life, but she's doing things at Maribod, which is
Mhm.
wonderful, is what
It
she
is.
wants.
She's volunteering there and she loves that. And I'm like, just keep doing that as much as you can. So, you
Yeah,
don't feel alone and,
yeah.
you have that service component and, yeah.
And she walks up and down, up and around on top of the Pilgrim Center.
Yes, she does the new one. Yeah. She showed me the roof up there and she's like, I do my exercises up
Yeah,
here. I'm like, yeah, it's a nice view up
yeah.
here.
But it's really got her out of, because I guess she was having physical difficulties. She
She
got
was,
into
well,
the
she took care of
exercise.
my grandma. Like, she wouldn't, we're like, get a nurse, hire some help. But she did it all. Like she took care of my grandma
Yeah,
till her last day. And
yeah,
that's really hard on the body, when you're having to like lift somebody up and bathe them and help them with like
yeah,
literally everything. It's like a baby all over again, except a very big sized baby.
yeah. No, wonderful, beautiful. This is very descriptive. You know, really very descriptive. But just imagine your grandfather just hanging out with the Mandali,
And
just
like
part
they
of that
knew him so
community.
well, right?
And
And he was just so
I
comfortable with
think
them all.
what I seem to remember is that they have kind of these Zoroastrian gatherings, and Bob and some of the Mandali would kind of show up. Can you imagine just
Can
having
you imagine? I
a
know.
family reunion and the avatar's over there with his disciples? They're all just kind of hanging out. I mean,
That's what was so funny because that's where like some of the family was just like, who does he think he is? And oh my God, he's like turned up here, but who does he think he is? And I just find that so funny that, not everybody recognized him, right? Like even people in his own family, like not
yeah,
everybody recognized him. And then yet we've got stories of, people like, oh my God, I saw his picture and it just drew me in. Or my mom like loves that 1925 picture because anytime people come to her house and they see that picture and they're like, is that Jesus? She's like, yes, but it's Meher Baba. And then, now in her older age, she tells everybody about Meher Baba. But, before she was like my brother and I should get so embarrassed when my dad would just be like, oh, that's like, yeah, that's Meher Baba. He's God, he's the avatar. He was Jesus. He was Zoroaster. He was Krishna. He was Buddha. And people look at my dad like what's he on? But,
When you
when
say
you're ready, right? Like when you're ready, you recognize him.
when you say the 1925 picture, you mean the one where he's like kind of scruffy and he has the hair
He's got the
curling.
curly hair
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
little beard. It's like on,
it
I
looks
think
just like
what
Jesus, what we imagine Jesus.
Jesus looked like.
yes,
Like,
Yes,
yes,
that one,
yes.
that one.
Yeah.
In,
Yeah.
in this one, I really get the Jesus vibes, and then in the glam shot outside the samadhi, I get very much the Krishna vibes. So
The
whenever,
glamour
whenever we
shot,
have
I love it.
yeah, that's my favorite pic of him. It's on my phone. But when we have people who come over to the house and we show them both pictures, they almost immediately, for some reason, the glam shot outside the samadhi, they go, "Oh my God, this is who Arjuna like learned the Gita from. This is him." Like they just feel it at a very, very deep level, and it can't be faked because there have been no shortage of Jesus imitators with the beard and the
Right,
hair and so forth. But
right.
there's this unique originality about him where you go, yeah, this is probably kind of what Jesus actually did look like.
Yeah, and like when he, like we have those stories that we read about, like in Bao's biography of him, of where people recognized him as whoever they saw the avatar as. So people saw him as Krishna, people saw him as Buddha, and like they'd be like, "I've been waiting for you." Even like these like holy men that he would, sometimes go and see, like they're like, "Oh, he's finally come." And Baba, like I think he's the only avatar that dressed as all of the previous avatars. We have pictures of him as like Zarathustra. We've got pictures of him as Krishna. He like actually put on the costumes of everyone that came before him. And we've got the 1925 picture where he looks like Jesus. And those pictures, like people identify with whichever avatar. Like they see him as that, and it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Because like we don't hear like like in Jesus's time that somebody recognized him as the Buddha or Krishna or anything like that. None of those stories are in the Bible, at least. So,
I think they were there, but I think the church institution purposely leaves out what Jesus did between the ages of 13 and 30. And my guess is he went to India during that period so that the five perfect masters of his era could bring him back to duality. But they don't want people knowing that is my
I'm
guess.
sure there's a
What,
lot of hidden, well, and we know he went to India after his resurrection. We know that, like, and he ended up in Kashmir. Baba even said that, right? Like that he's buried
right.
somewhere in Kashmir. So yeah, there's a lot the church probably doesn't say.
You
even
know,
though-
someone sent me this recently, a quote from Baba. I am the last avatar in this present cycle of 24, and therefore the greatest and the most powerful. I have the attributes of 5. I am as pure as Zoroaster, as truthful as Ram, as mischievous as Krishna, as gentle as Jesus, and as fiery as Muhammad.
Hmm.
That's what Baba says. So they're all the attributes.
So this is what does the last cycle mean? I wonder about that sometimes, right? Like this is the last cycle, then we know he comes again in about 700 years and it's a whole
Yeah.
cycle starting all over again.
Yeah, I think I think the last cycle, I think Abraham was the last one of the last cycle. But yeah, this is one of the most powerful.
Yeah. Yeah,
See.
Baba does say 3/4 of the world gets destroyed, and I don't know if it's the physical world or like our sanskaras or what it is, but I guess we just keep holding on to his Dhamma and having that faith that he'll take care of us. Whatever needs to happen for the best happens.
I have
Yeah.
a question, fairly mundane, but I'm curious. I had a chance to see some of his original handwritten manuscripts. People have, transcribed them over the years, and some of it's very difficult to read, and he like constantly crosses stuff out and he writes over them when he describes the nothingness and the everythingness. And
Yes,
sometimes
yes.
it just kind of blends into your head at some point. But at some point you start to feel the truth of what he's saying because it's beyond the mind. So curious, when he conversed, typically was he conversing in English, or I'm talking about before the alphabet board, right? Was he usually speaking in Gujarati or Persian, or like what was his preferred communication?
So from what I understand, he spoke in Dari and he spoke in Gujaratis, right?
Okay.
So Dari is like a language spoken by the Zoroastrians. So he grew up speaking that in his home. And then Gujarati is the other language that the Zoroastrians speak. So those were mainly the languages, but he went to school, to an English medium school. So he was very well versed in English, which is why when he switched over to the alphabet board, it was all in English. And the alphabet board is so interesting. So do you guys remember like several years ago now, there was that game that came out called Pokemon Go. Like you played it on your phone and you were out there like doing weird things like in the air. So I would take Sanaz, my daughter, out and we would play Pokemon Go, and we were having a great time. And my mom saw this one time, right? And she's like, you've all gone crazy. Do you know what you're doing? Like what you're doing in the air looks like what Baba would do. Like, like when you see the videos of Baba and his hands and everything. And then my brother says to her, well, like he was the first texter. That alphabet board, he was texting. Like, that's why we all sit here and this is what we do now. Like we text, right? Like we're all texting. And he's like, Neville's just like, I'm going to make a t-shirt. And there's that picture of Baba with like, the alphabet board. And he wants to like put the original texter on it with like Baba, that picture. I'm like, you totally should do it. Like,
that would be awesome.
That's like totally, he was texting, and it's like he drew that down, and then now look at us, like we're all texting. I'm like, oh my God, we're texting. We're like imaginary pulling things out of the air when we play Pokemon Go. So, I mean, he did so much stuff. Like if you look at the things like he did, how he like brought the technology we have now like into reality. Like that was the avatar that did that. Yes, it's like this scientist and that scientist and this person and that person invented this, but like I think he brought that down. Like he knew this age and how the people were going to be. And my grandfather would always say these funny things when we were little, and he would watch my brother and I watching TV, so engrossed in the TV. My grandfather would say things like, look how compassionate God is, that he's given you television so you can focus and meditate. so well on that you're lost, like when you're watching TV. My brother and I were like little, right? We're like, oh my God, like, what is he talking about? And like, there's so many of these things. And now, like, when I think back, like, he was right. Like, yeah, like we shouldn't be meditating on TV, but look at like how engrossed we get in that. And then if you just think back and like realize, like, if you can get lost in like television or a show or your phone or whatever, like that ability to like focus and meditate is like there for all of us. But you can't empty your mind that way when you try to meditate, because then like all those thoughts come. And my grandfather was always like, well, those are the commercials. You have to just let those come and go. Don't focus on those. Those are the commercials. And so there were all these things, like my grandfather said, that my brother and I now as adults in our 40s, right? We're like, he knew some stuff. Like, I think he was a lot more advanced than he like let on. Like, he would say this stuff and we would laugh at him. And we would, of course, be like, oh my gosh, you know, like all this stuff that's happening in Iran right now, he predicted. And my grandfather said, because we would always talk about like how the number of Zoroastrians is so tiny and we're this dying community. And he's always like, this community is never going to die out. It's small right now, but you watch. He's like, just in the blink of an eye like that, boom, our numbers are going to like just blow up. And I'm like, yeah, these are just the thoughts of like an old man who has these wonderful thoughts about, you know, Zoroastrianism and Iran and just all this stuff. And now, like, you know, the people there are protesting to like get rid of a very like theocratic, terrible regime. And sadly, like most of them all, you know, like what this regime has done is turned them off of Islam, and they want to return to their roots because the roots of that country are Zoroastrian. And, you know, they're like, this was forced on us. We don't want this. And in places in Iraq and Turkey where the Kurds are, they've already now have fire temples there. And my grandfather predicted this, like when he was with us and he saw like, you know, Saddam Hussein was gassing the Kurds. Like, remember that was all on the news. And my grandfather literally was in tears. He's like, these are our people. He's gassing our people. I'm like, the Kurds are our people? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, these are Zoroastrians. And now they actually have like Zoroastrian temples there. And so I'm like, how did he like know that some of this stuff? That's why, like, you know, when somebody was, you were asking Sam, like, you know, did anybody like have any like awakenings or inklings? I think my grandfather definitely did, and then I think my dad did too. My dad, like, especially towards the end.
I think it would be almost impossible to be next to a perfect master and not get at least some traces over time, right?
Maybe something, right? Like, and then my brother and I are in our 40s, like, oh, now it makes sense. Okay, now it makes sense. But it took us this long for it to make sense.
Well, I mean, it's not that long. It's 20 years. Some people go lifetimes without getting any glimpses.
I suppose so. We're maybe on the express course, but I wish we understood it sooner. I wish we understood it sooner. But it's like one of those things when you're ready, right? Like my grandfather gave me that book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And I had that book, I kid you not, for like 10 years before I read it. But when I read it, I was ready for it then. Like, you know, reading it earlier wouldn't have made any sense. But I'm like, wow, I hung on to it for 10 years. But when I read it, I was like, wow, this is so awesome.
The interesting thing is all these people, Meher Baba helped me piece together all these masters. So I knew that Mahavatar Babaji, Yukteswar, and Yogananda, they were perfect. I knew that before. I'd heard about Ramana Maharshi and I'd heard about St. Francis of Assisi. But then in Meher Baba's work, I saw him referring to each of them according to their specific spiritual work. And it was very clear, this all fits together beautifully now.
Yes, I know. And, you know, I'm not so interested. People are always like, well, I wonder who the perfect masters are now, because Baba always said there are 5, but he also said there's so many fake masters out there. Don't worry, you've got your direct connection to me. So don't worry, they're there doing their work. But, you know, you don't have to feel like you need to go out looking for them. But my mom still is kind of like, well, I wonder, oh, you know, I was watching the Indian news and they talked about, I don't know, today she was telling me they were talking about this, some Baba, some young guy in India now, and all the ministers are going and bow down to him. And I'm like, Mom, come on. Like, it's India. People go bow down like at every like person they think. I'm like, you know, just don't worry about it. And, you know, it's funny, like Baba gives her funny little lessons, like anytime, like, you know, she's looking for something or searching or trying to like find somebody, somewhere, somehow, some Baba thing comes back around and she's like, see, he's just got me in his web. I can't even get out if I try. I'm like, see, lucky you. He's just taking care of you so you don't run off somewhere else and get lost because, you're supposed to be here with him.
Probably a good thing. I mean, India is such a paradox. So many genuine people in the spiritual hierarchy, and probably more frauds as well. Imitation
Exactly.
saints. It's like an absolute paradox and
It is.
polarity.
It is. And that's why it's like, well, we've got our direct connection to Baba, and I think that's good enough. I don't feel the need to go looking for any live masters. But I do wonder sometimes. I'm like, I wonder who they are now. They're five,
Well,
and are they all in India, or maybe some are they like in the Middle East? Like, where are
there's
they?
only, yeah, I mean, among the popular masters, there's only one that I know for sure is a seventh planer. I mean, but apart from that, like most of the influential ones of the hierarchy, they don't advertise themselves. They
No,
have no
they
need for
don't.
fame or name or anything
And
else.
they
They're just
don't
quietly
want
doing
that,
their work.
actually. They really don't want that.
They
So
don't
who
want
did
that. It
you
actually
think?
impedes their work.
It does. It does. So who did you mention? You thought somebody like currently, who did you say?
Oh, Eckhart Tolle. He's on the.
Oh, I know Eckhart Tolle. Yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, I don't know if anyone else. There's a lot of popular teachers out there who claim to be in that state, but very sure or very certain that they're not what they claim to be.
Right. Or they get lost, right? Like Baba talked about, like on the planes where you're on this certain plane, you do have like a certain amount of power, but they always tend to misuse it and kind of demote themselves again. And that's like lifetimes before you
But
can
you
get.
know, but I think that's charitable. In most cases, I think people who claim to be liberated are fully conscious of the fact that they are not all the way there. But
Of course.
the temptation of name and fame and riches and worldly pleasure that you gain from claiming that status is so great and so enticing that they succumb. But yeah, that heaps upon lifetimes of
Yeah.
like binding. Yeah, you're right.
That ego, right? Like if you look at the perfect masters like Babajan and Shirdi Sai Baba and Upasni and Nara, and like you look at all of them, like look at what their lives were. Yes, they always had a following, but they were never out there for name or fame or trying to like make themselves known. If anything, they were trying to stay kind of hidden. But like it's amazing, right? Like look at Babajan's story. She walked from so far, and she was like from a noble family almost, to come sit by that tree in Pune because she knew like the time would come when it would be time for her to like give Baba that kiss. And we have stories in the family about like how much like Shirin Mai, his mom, was so angry at Babajan because it was like, you ruined my son, like my perfectly good son who was going to college and had a future. Like, you look at what you did to him. Because she was, I mean, yeah, she was his mom, but she was also very human and had those feelings you would have for your child, wanting a good life for them. And now look at the path that he's gone down. And I
My
love
favorite
that.
My favorite part was when Babajan, I think it was her, said that he would twirl the world on his finger like a little
Yes, that
ball.
was
And I
her.
immediately thought of, the this avatar, there's this picture of Varaha, the boar avatar, twirling the world on his nose.
Whirling
I
the
immediately
world.
thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but Shirin Mai then came to a good relationship with Babajan eventually, but she did not like her at all. Like she was very angry at and blamed her for what happened to her Merwan, her Merog, as she called him. Like that's what the family called him. And I, as a mom, like I understand that. Like she was very human. She was his mother. And I love like those family nuances, like, so human, but also so holy, like so godlike, but so human too.
Well, it makes it real because oftentimes when you get a version of like Krishna and like what Yashoda was like, etc., it's very sanitized through the years. I'm sure there was a lot more. It was a lot more raw. Like
Oh,
in
I'm
in
sure.
in seeing Merwan's life, we get a glimpse of what it might have looked like with Joseph and Jesus.
Yeah.
Actually when it happened.
Yeah. And the stories of Krishna and stealing the butter and knocking the butter. I'm like, I'm sure there were times she was really pissed that, oh my God, he got into the butter again, or he's now gone and stolen the neighbor's butter. Like she was a mom and he was a kid.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, they do get quite sanitized.
I'm gonna hop off, but I just wanted to say you are a fantastic orator. It was great hearing from you. I actually did not know we'd have a guest speaker. Usually we just discuss some sort of topic in these meetings, and I like meeting the group even though I'm not in Myrtle Beach. But this was really refreshing. Thanks for your
Oh,
time, and
yeah.
thanks
Where
for
are
the.
you? I'm not in Myrtle Beach either. Where are you?
I'm in New Jersey. I visited the center twice,
Okay.
and hope to make another visit sometime when my schedule permits.
Yeah, I'm in Portland, Oregon, so I'm way out on the West Coast.
Oh, okay, nice.
Most people here are not actually in Myrtle Beach.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I'm the only one right now. Of course, Jeff is as well, but he
Mhm.
signed off.
Jasmine, your stories were fantastic. Thank you. I was going to go to sleep and I was like, you started telling incredible stories. I'm like, oh, I'm like,
I'm
I
glad
need
you
to-
stayed, and I hope you sleep well and have beautiful dreams then. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Good night.
Thank you. It's
Th-
fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. It was
You're
awesome.
welcome,
Come
Jay
back.
Baba. Thank
Come
you all
back
for
again.
coming. Bye.
Jai Baba.
Thank you. It's quite wonderful. Jay
You're
Baba.
welcome, Jay Baba. Bye.
Jai Baba. Thank you so much.
Jai
I
Baba.
will. I'll end with this quote here. I opened randomly to you and I, that Rick Chapman put together. Enjoy all. Don't discard anything, but think it is Baba. Baba who enjoys. Baba who is eating. It is Baba sleeping soundly, and when you wake up, remember it is Baba getting up. Keep this one thought constantly with you. Jai Baba.
Jay Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.